Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh Jeffries video. In this video, I'm going to be transforming a smashed and broken iPhone XS Max into an iPhone 12 Pro Max. By using this custom housing, not only will this iPhone be without damage, but will also look like a newer model. Our custom housing is in the iPhone 12 Pro Pacific Blue color, and from a first glance, looks indistinguishable from the original. Inside, the housing is made to fit the older iPhone XS Max and contains all the correct screw placement needed for all the components. Also included is a custom flash flex cable, which allows us to reposition the flash. As the iPhone XS only has two cameras, this new casing has an inbuilt fake third camera and LiDAR sensor. You cannot simply just install a regular iPhone 12 housing, as its internal components differ. I'm curious to see how the end result turns out and whether it appears to look like a real iPhone 12 Pro Max. While changing the casing, we'll also replace the display as it's damaged, and the battery as well for good measure. To begin, I'll remove the two pentalobe screws from the bottom of our iPhone XS Max. Then I can use a suction cup to lift up the display panel and insert a plastic pick. I didn't even need to use heat for this phone, as it separated really easily. At first I thought someone must have been inside, but based on what I can tell, it looks like it's never been opened. Using the eye hold tool will hold the display in place whilst I unscrew the brackets and disconnect the display flex cables. Once we have the brackets off, I'll start unplugging the flex cables. The first one is glued into place and forms part of the Face ID sensor. If damaged, it cannot be replaced unless done by Apple. Once we have that unplugged, only two display flex cables need to be detached before we can remove the whole display assembly. Now that that's removed, we can get a good look at the inside of this iPhone XS Max in its totally stock configuration. We're now going to tear this phone down and remove everything down to those tiny little mesh grills in the speaker ports to transfer those components into our iPhone 12 style casing. I'll be starting at the lower portion of the phone, and I'll remove the Taptic engine and speaker, as well as a few other little components and screws, which will give us access to the battery that we'll remove next. While the bottom section doesn't take up much space, there's a crazy amount of screws of all different types, so I'll have to keep changing my screwdriver bit. After disconnecting the flex cable underneath, I'm able to remove both the Taptic engine and speaker. With that out of the way, we can now access the battery removal strips. These stubborn things hold the battery in place, a little too good. They are easy to break, but if pulled horizontally, there is a smaller chance of breaking them. The main issue with that is trying to get enough space to remove the strips. There is a lot of fragile things inside, and you don't want to damage them trying to remove the battery. With our battery free, it's time to disconnect the front-facing camera and Face ID module. These cables are also adhered into place, so extra care needs to be taken when removing this component, as it can't be replaced without the use of Apple's proprietary pairing tools. Next to come out is our logic board. There are a load of flex cables that need to be removed, as well as the camera modules, which will make removing the logic board a little bit easier. As we need to remove them anyway, we'll take them out now. If you thought that was a lot of flex cables, under this little bracket at the end, there's two more. Then, after unfastening 3 Phillips head screws and removing the SIM card tray, we can remove our logic board from the phone. Back down at the bottom, it's time to remove the charging port and antenna from our iPhone. As mentioned earlier, there is several different screw types here, including tri-wing, Phillips, and a special standoff bit. So keeping track of screws is very important when it comes time to reassembling this phone. After removing the charging port, we finally have access to that antenna, which we can now unadhere and remove from the phone. Proceeding down to the microscopic level, we now have to remove the little plastic retaining brackets and the mesh grills from the speaker and microphone ports. These aren't included in our new casing, so we'll need to move them across from our old one. This is a step missed by a lot of repair technicians because it's time consuming and a very difficult process. Although, as with all my repairs, I aim to complete them as good as possible. Back up at the top of our iPhone, there's a few more antennas we'll need to remove from the casing. Starting with this one over on the right hand side, which goes around our camera port. Up at the top, there is also another antenna that we'll need to unscrew and remove. This one has lots of little clips, brackets, and other attachments connecting to the screw holes, so we'll need to make sure to keep track of those for when it's time to reassemble the phone. At the right hand side, I'll need to unfasten the power button, a display retaining clip, and the SIM eject push rod. On the left hand side, it's a similar process with lots more display retaining clips, as well as the volume and mute switch cable. There is also a sensor or something on that cable that connects into the frame, although I cannot find what it is or what it does. But this flex cable also connects to the wireless charging module, so we'll need to get that out next. I'll start by inserting a metal jimmy tool to allow me to create a gap that I can insert this plastic pick into and release the adhesive underneath the wireless charging module. Once that's out of the way, we can get a look at the module itself before proceeding to remove our volume and power buttons. There is a spring and a retaining clip that will need to be removed from each button. This is a very fiddly process and will require a very precise pair of tweezers and a metal prying tool to be able to lift up the retaining clip. Once those are out, we have fully disassembled our iPhone XS Max. We can now see all of the parts that have been removed spread out across two magnetic mats. There is really a lot of parts and a lot of screws in this iPhone, significantly more than found in many other smartphones. It's now time to crack out our new replacement housing, which is styled like the iPhone 12 Pro, and start reassembling everything back together. I'll be starting with the volume and power buttons. As you can see, the old ones aren't just dirty, but they're also containing this little rubber O-ring which we'll need to transfer to our new buttons. I'll need to do this for the two pegs on every button. These are also another commonly missed step. While not necessary, these O-rings help prevent debris and water from entering the phone. After the O-rings have been installed, I can get the buttons into our new frame. Next to attach is the retaining clips and springs for those buttons we just installed. I faced some difficulty with this step as two of the replacement buttons had slight defects on their legs. After some work, I was able to fix them and get the retaining clips installed. Before we can get the flex cable reinstalled, we'll need to change over the mute switch from the black iPhone XS button to our iPhone 12 Pacific blue color button. This will match our new casing, so is a necessary step. I'll reinstall our button assembly and wireless charging module back into place. After securing all of the Phillips head screws, I can now glue the wireless charging module into place. To do that, I'll be using some E8000 glue. I would never recommend anyone to use this glue to hold on a display assembly or a back of a phone, but for little things like a wireless charging module or LED flash, it works perfectly fine. Speaking of an LED flash, this is our modified one, which is specific to this modified frame. It also contains the power button and rear camera microphone. I will screw the power button in before proceeding on with our repair. After reconnecting the SIM card tray push rod, I will reattach all the brackets responsible for holding on the front display panel. Down at the lower portion of the phone, it's time to get the mesh grills and their retaining pieces of plastic reinstalled. This tedious job definitely requires a lot of patience. I found it was easiest to prop up the phone and allow gravity to assist you in getting in these mesh grills. Once installed, we can reattach the antenna and the charging port assembly back into our phone. There is a lot of screws that will need to be attached at this point to secure in both components. Next to go in is the Taptic engine and speaker assembly. After fastening the connector below, I can line everything up and fasten it down into place, making sure to reattach the little grounding clip that goes on the bottom screw of the Taptic engine. After everything down at the bottom is fastened into place, I can reattach this little protective piece on the left hand side before we turn our attention to the top of the phone again. Looking at the power button flex cable, it has the modified LED flash installed. This allows us to reposition the flash to the location where it would be on the iPhone 12. While the LED flash fits, there's no visible place for the microphone next to it to be installed. Originally it was located between the two cameras, but that's no longer possible. However, I noticed a small hole below where the microphone was sitting. It didn't turn out to be a microphone hole or even a possible place to put it, as it created too much of a bump that the logic board wouldn't fit in. On the back you can see the microphone hole, but it's covered by metal and our current cable could never reach it anyway. I decided to reach out to the seller and ask for some advice. To sum up, they said there was no microphone with the new flex cable and that the factory doesn't generate useless flex cables, but installation position depends on what I want, but they did recommend the camera's frame edge, so I decided to go with that. I did also reference some other videos online where people have done this very conversion, although in those videos they tended to just hide the microphone cable and make no mention to the fact that there was nowhere to put it and that it might actually affect sound quality. I decided to continue on and hope for the best that the audio would be at least half decent for the rear microphone. If there were to be issues with this microphone, it won't affect things like Siri or phone calls, as those use different mics throughout the phone. Although it would destroy the ability to record videos on this phone, so I'm really hoping that the sound actually works and is half decent. It's now time to get our logic board reinstalled, and this is where we face our first problem. The new flex cable for our LED flash and power button is crooked and doesn't connect very easily. The way I got it to connect was to slightly remove our logic board, connect it, and then push our logic board back into place. This kind of bends the cable, but it stays in place. After one issue is resolved, another is found. The logic board is not sitting flat, and after installing 2 Phillips head screws, it really becomes evident that something's wrong. And of course, our modified flex cable is to blame. The microphone on that cable was sitting underneath the board, making it sit uneven. I had to reposition the microphone in order to get everything screwed down. And this brings me to our third issue. The microphone isn't actually pointing outside the device. It is stuck on the inside, which means it's picking up sound from inside the phone and not on the outside. With no way to avoid this, the only thing I can do is continue with reassembly. The microphone is now blocking the camera flex cable, so I had to push it aside some more to be able to connect the flex cable for the camera. I don't understand how they could have gone to the extent of making a custom square frame and various other things to make this all work, but then totally forget about making sure the microphone has a place to be installed. Regardless, I'm going to continue with this build and hopefully our microphone is at least somewhat usable. With the insides mostly assembled, it's now time to turn our attention to our new display panel. Apple pairs the display to the phone by serial number, so I'll need to transfer those numbers from the old display to the new one to be able to retain the True Tone function. Another paired component inside is the Face ID module and the earpiece flex cable, which is what I'm removing now. It's important not to damage any of this, as it will permanently break the Face ID capabilities. It is of course held in with some light adhesive, so using some heat may assist in its removal process. I'll need to transfer it to our new display, which is a refurbished panel. That means it's an Apple display that's been previously cracked and someone has replaced the top layer of glass. It's now time to bring the two halves together, and to do that I'll need to install some fresh adhesive. This one was included with the housing, so I'm not sure if it differs from the original. I'll apply it down onto the phone and remove its protective film. At this point, I can install our new battery. This will ensure, after going to all this work, that this phone will have good battery life. It's finally time to get our display panel attached and test out our phone. I'll start by connecting the earpiece and Face ID cable, as well as the two cables for the display panel. After reconnecting the battery, I can press and hold the power button and we're greeted with nothing. It turns out our new battery was completely dead. After allowing it to charge, we'll test out the phone. I'm going to reinstall the brackets, covering up the display and battery connections. After those have been installed, all that's left to do is to clean the inside of the device with a microfiber cloth to remove any dust or fingerprints that I've left inside the phone. After that, we can close everything up and complete the build. After reinstalling the 2 pentalobe screws into the bottom of the phone and removing the plastic protective film covering up our new display panel, we're done. So this is it, the iPhone XS Pro Max. It might be a XS at its heart, but it's got the looks of the iPhone 12 Pro. Not only have we restored a once broken phone, but we have given it an upgrade on its looks. Of course, it lacks the iPhone 12's hardware, but from a first glance, it looks almost identical. The fake camera looks realistic, but the curved display ultimately gives it away. Given the shape of the frame, it also makes for a gap at the top and bottom of the screen. By changing the battery, we have triggered a battery is unable to be verified as genuine message, just like the anti-repair mechanisms found on the real iPhone 12. This means the battery health has been disabled deliberately because of that change in battery. All of the buttons and everything on this phone work perfectly fine, and as for that microphone, take a listen. So this is the audio quality coming out of our converted iPhone XS. This right here is actually a real iPhone 12. It's a little worse for wear. Amazingly, after all that flex cable origami, the microphone still works. Of course, it's muffled from being placed inside the phone, but it does still work. As for the modified flash, it also works. Some of the time. Other times, it just doesn't turn on, and then it'll just turn on the next time you try and use it. Overall, the housing itself is a fantastic modification, but that flex cable really lets this all down because of the muffled microphone and the unreliable flash. And on that note, this has been a Hugh Jeffries video. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and consider checking out the custom tech playlist for more videos just like this one. And if you're looking for any used devices, be sure to check out my website, link for which is down in the description. That's all for this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.